Well, brothers and sisters, it's wonderful to be here. We call ourselves Water Warriors, and we're just thrilled to be here to try to introduce the concept of the need for us to talk about water when we're talking about climate change. Very briefly, we have three reasons that we're trying to do this, or there are three arguments that we have when it comes to this issue. The first is that water is dramatically affected by greenhouse gas emission fuel climate change. We know that as the temperature rises, that the glaciers are melting. We know that water is evaporating too quickly. We know that because we're pumping up polluting our groundwater and overusing our surface water, we're over pumping our groundwater. And we know that we're pulling our water up out of the ground in a way that's removing water from, I lost my track of thought here, All right, so water is impacted by climate change as the planet heats, our water melts more quickly. So the glaciers, the snowpacks. We've been hearing stories all over Copenhagen this week about people who live in areas affected by melting glaciers. Those of us who live in cold countries can see the snowpacks melting more quickly, and it's affecting us dramatically. So that's the first argument. And we feel that hasn't been enough in the discussion. But more importantly, we're here, and you're going to hear from Michael Kravsik today, who's probably the leading authority on this anywhere. And we're going to make the argument that the way we abuse and misplace water from where it's been put by nature to where we want it to be is actually a cause of climate change. And this is nowhere in the debate at all. You talk to environmentalists, you talk to climate experts, they don't know this. And this is a very, very important part of the equation. Michael will go into it in more depth, but in essence, as we take water from where it was placed by nature, and we move it perhaps for industrial agriculture, and we grow food in deserts, we remove water from where it's needed for a healthy hydrologic cycle. We suck enormous amounts of water up into great big megacities, and if those cities are anywhere near the ocean, we see that water as waste when we're finished with it, and we dump it in the ocean. We take water and we use it to grow crops or to produce energy or whatever, which we then ship away from not only watersheds but out of the basins altogether, or out of countries altogether. Give you an example, you keep hearing about climate change being the cause of drought in Australia. I would argue very strongly that they've got that wrong. That what they've done is that they have removed the water systematically from the Murray-Darling to make a very wealthy country, and they've done that by exporting their water in the form of cotton and rice, more recently wine, but this has been a tradition. And so if you go to Australia, you see the over-extraction all the way down. When you get to the mouth of the Murray-Darling, it's dying. The water is literally, the seawater is coming in, and the Murray-Darling is dying from the mouth up. And what each government successively says is, oh, it's climate change, and it blew in from away. Well, it's not. You cannot continue to remove that amount of water, and there are now 80% more water rights than actual water exists. 80% more licenses on the Murray-Darling system than actual water. You realize that we're doing it wrong. So we're trying to put the notion out there that the way we're displacing and treating and abusing water is in fact a cause of climate change. And in fact, if it's not put into the equation, we're not going to get either the analysis or the solution right. And the solution, which is restoration of watersheds, the restoration of healthy hydrologic cycles through this restoration of water systems, is a mitigation factor in climate change, and it's not just an issue of adaptation. The third argument we have is that the real face of climate change, or the first face of climate change, is the face of people without water. Close to 2 billion people in our world now live in parts of the world without access to enough clean water. Close to 3 billion people have to walk more than a kilometer to get fresh water of any kind, whether it's contaminated or not. And every 8 seconds somewhere in our world, someone dies of waterborne disease. A child dies of waterborne disease. And this is entirely around water, and this is entirely connected to the climate crisis that we're facing. And I would also argue that the face of climate change is the most, and the water side of that is the most obvious face of inequality in our world. Because everywhere in the world, if you have money, you can buy water, and if you don't, you have to do without and watch your children die in the most awful way that's possible. Now, we're creating a water justice movement that's parallel to the climate justice movement, and I want you to know, and I expect everybody in this room is pretty well of the camp of the climate change, climate justice movement, which is that we critique the solution, the false solution of carbon trading, of markets, of derivatives, which allows the continuation of the globalization, of greed, of unlimited growth, of profit making from the crisis that that's being created here. We say that there's a parallel in water, and the parallel is that they're trying to do the same thing, creating water markets, creating water trading, beginning to set up a system just like we've created privatization of the air. We're commodifying the water and saying, well, the only way to preserve this dwindling resource is to put a price on it, and therefore the market will take care of the shortage. In other words, whoever can get it and pay for it will have all they want, and those who do not will not. So we find that there's a parallel false solution being proposed for the water crisis as there is for the climate crisis. And we deeply believe that climate justice is water justice, and that you can't have one without the other. And we need to talk about them in the same breath. In fact, of course, there's the third piece of it, which is food justice. There's been a lot of wonderful work at this forum here on food, but there's been very, very little on water. And we feel strongly that we have to bring the three issues together: the land and food, water and climate. And we've got to stop talking about them as separate issues. And I find even when I talk to climate experts, a lot of them just have put no thought to water except that first point that I made, which is that water is affected by climate change. We believe that you could deal with greenhouse gas emissions even if we were successful, dream along, and coming up with the right solution here in Copenhagen this week, that would not be the end of the crisis, because the other part of the crisis is that we are creating parts of the world that are literally physically running out of water as we speak. It's not cyclical drought. It won't end if we end greenhouse gas emissions. It's something else, and we need to address that something else and put it together. If we see these justices in separate silos, we're not going to put them together and come up with a real solution. So that's the urgency that we feel. We want these discussions. We realize they're not going to be in Copenhagen in the Bella Center this time, but we know that this process isn't ending here in Copenhagen this week, and that we really want to move forward with allies in the climate justice movement to put these movements and this analysis together so we can come up with a real solution based, of course, on a very different set of principles and values for our Earth and each other. Thank you.
Why did you not mention that the majority of those suffering of the lack of water and corporate interest in the poor areas in North and South are women, and how do you bring the women's rights and women's peace into the water issue?
Just on the question about the United Nations having a lot of problems and a lot of corporate influence, absolutely. But I would say there's still a struggle at the United Nations for the soul of the United Nations, and it's still the only, and the General Assembly is still the only institution that has the possibility of speaking for people and their elected governments, imperfect as it is. Whereas the World Bank, in my opinion, is corrupt and useless. The World Trade Organization is terrible and we must defeat it. So there's nothing redeemable about these other institutions. The problem on water is that the United Nations has abandoned its responsibility, and it's turned it over to something called the World Water Council, which is made up of the big heads of the big corporate players in the water world. And the World Water Council every year holds its World Water Forum, And they act like a big United Nations event, and they put it on, and thousands of people come, but it's just a great big trade show. It's not a real thing at all. So we're trying to wrest back the control. It would be as if this summit were put on by ExxonMobil, and at one level it's true, it is, but at least there's a semblance of it being put on by governments who are too influenced by corporations. But in the World Water Council, there's not even a pretense. It is corporations. So we have to wrest that back, and we have to struggle for the soul of the United Nations, because this corporate vision for the world, whether it's food, energy, or water, is everywhere. And the only place that I think that we can, aside from right on the ground, which is the most important, but the only institution we have left to fight it, I think, is at the UN. So not perfect by any means, but still worth struggling for, I would argue.